Start in a sec. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Libby Book Club. I'm your host, David Allen Patali, and I'm actually broadcasting to you tonight from Bustleton. So, before we begin, I'd just like to pay my respects to the traditional owners, the Wadandi people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And of course, it's fantastic to have your company on this kind of chilly Wednesday evening. And our guest tonight is the brilliantly amazing writer, Emily Paull. And we're going to be talking to her about her book, The Distance Between Dreams, which was recently published by Fremantle Press. Emily, welcome to the Libby Book Club.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. I just want to preface this by saying I was actually at the Fogarty Award ceremony in Perth a few years ago now, where Emily was shortlisted for this, and I gave a massive cheer when her name was called. So this is a very cool sort of close the circle moment for me to now have the privilege of speaking to Emily about her wonderful book. So you can also question anything you like within reason to Emily. If you join the chat, pop a question in the chat. Of course, we're going to have a copy of The Distance Between Dreams to give to what we consider to be the question that ignites the most interesting chat or
Mm.
the most insightful revelation about the text. So, Emily, I'd just like to ask very much a Dorothy Dixer to start us off. What is the distance between dreams about? We've got people joining tonight that may have
Mm.
read, may not have read. So we don't want to give the whole kit and caboodle away, but can you take us through what the distance between dreams is about?
Yeah, sure. So it's a historical fiction. It is set in Fremantle, Western Australia between 1939 and 1945, and I like to describe it as a wrong side of the tracks love story with a bit of a twist. So our two main characters, we've got Winston Keller. He's a working class man. He's from South Fremantle. He works at the Mills and Wares biscuit factory, which if anyone's read Elemental by Amanda Curtin, she talks about the way that the whole suburb just smells like warm butter and baking biscuits and smells delicious. So he works there and he meets Sarah Willis, who is a upper middle class, maybe a bit more upper class young woman who moves to town and just totally shakes his world up, introduces him to the idea that he could possibly dream of a better life.
It's the thing that comes across very early in the novel in that Winston is constantly saying things that in modern language, I'm like, that's a limiting belief. He's constantly dashing his own hopes. Whereas
Mm,
Sarah, she's quite blithe. She believes everything. She wants to become a film star, and to her, it's as simple as jumping on a ship and going to the United States.
mm,
Yeah, so
yeah.
very much they're star-crossed lovers in a lot of sense, but they come from extremely different worlds. Can you tell us a bit about Sarah's background and
Mm.
then also Winston's? Because that's going to take us into some other territory.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really something I was aware that I was doing until the wonderful people at Fremantle Press suggested the title, The Distance Between Dreams, and wrote the beautiful back copy for the blurb. But Winston being working class, he has to be really practical. He's always thinking about how do I make enough money to help my parents pay the bills? Are we going to make rent this month? Are we going to have enough money to buy what we need? So dreaming about something and therefore maybe taking a chance on doing something different, it's not really something he can entertain the possibility of. Whereas for Sarah, as long as it's a good look for her father, who is new money and it has some things he feels like he needs to prove, um, anything really is a possibility because they have the money to afford it. So yeah, getting on a ship and going to America and becoming a film star, that is technically something that they could afford. It's not necessarily something that her father's going to give her though, because there's a bit of a tawdry element to being a film star, and her favorite film star is Jean Harlow, who there was another actress, or maybe it was Eleanor Roosevelt, who used to say the T is silent, so Jean Harlot was sort of the nickname implied there. So yeah, it's that difference of class and of when you're brought up with money, particularly in that time where it was the difference between haves and have-nots would have been really stark. Dreaming is kind of a luxury.
Tell us about how they meet, because everything you've just described is perfectly set up in the party
Mm,
that Winston goes along to. How
yeah.
how does this come about? Set the scene for us?
Yeah, so Sarah's got this best friend called Marley Jones, and it's almost like the expression keeping up with the Joneses was invented for Marley's family. They live in this big white house that I imagined as being in somewhere maybe like East Fremantle, Bicton area, up on the side of the sloping hills looking over the river where all the sailboats are glittering on the water, and the house looks like a wedding cake. And Sarah's there because she's an invited guest to Marley's 21st birthday, but Winston's there because his best friend Lockie has said, hey, I know you need a bit of extra cash this month. If you come with me to this party, I'm sure they'll hire you to be a waiter. So he goes along with Lockie and they get there, and the housekeeper says, what do you mean you've just brought an extra person to work here? We can't train a waiter on the fly. We don't even have a uniform for him. Sorry, you're just going to have to go. And so Lockie puts on his waistcoat and picks up a tray and says, oh, sorry, mate, maybe if you hang around, she might change her mind. So Winston's sitting on the wall out the front when Sarah arrives for the party, and she says, why don't you come in with me? And I will read that bit to you later, probably.
Great, that'd be great. I particularly enjoyed the physicality of Sarah, where she instantly corrects his hair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
she to her people. Sarah's a very complex character, but are people in essence people are playthings to her in some
In
ways.
some ways, yeah. Yeah.
When I say she's complex, all is not what it seems.
No,
When we first meet these characters, definitely all is not what it seems. But with Winston, what would you say he gives the impression of? But then, what do we get to know about him?
yeah. So Winston, he's an artist. The way that he processes the world is he sketches it. He's this like tall, skinny, scruffy, sandy blonde hair always hanging in his eyes, wears this old baker boy cap that belonged to his grandfather, always wearing hand-me-down clothes that are maybe a bit too big for him. He doesn't look like he could win a fight, but he's got this secret reserve of strength. And I think the biggest strength about him is that he's loyal and he's a good friend, and the people he cares about, he will stand by them and protect them and do what it takes to keep them well, not only in a physical sense, but also in like a mental sense. He cares about the people he loves being happy. And he's a bit of a leader in that way. Not that, anybody would put him in a position of leadership, but he's a leader in the sense that he's just that kind of person.
He's also very good to his parents. I mean, in the
Mm,
sense that he needs to work in order to support them. But the fact that he does that, he does that quite willingly. He's got a real sense of honor.
yeah. Yeah, he loves his parents. They're his role models, but a lot of the book is also about him realizing that his parents are people too, and that they were young once too, and that they've made mistakes. He's sort of got them both up on a pedestal, and he believes that true love is possible because he's seen that his parents are still in love all these years later, despite everything that's happened to them. And then he sort of realizes, well, they've actually got some secrets and they've done some things that have had consequences further down the track that he needs to now deal with. So there's this moment in particular with his father where he realizes, hey, my dad was a young man once too. He's a person. I need to get to know him all over again.
And I suppose, yeah, to the point you make, the next morning, Winston's smitten with Sarah.
Mm,
They've spent all night dancing, and then he, tells his dad about that, and then some things start to become hinted to him that
mm,
no, that this family is known.
mm.
We know this family, and there's history here.
And it's such a Perth thing, isn't it? Like
Mm.
Sarah's moved from Northam to Fremantle
Totally.
very
Yeah.
recently, and yet somehow the families already know each other and they already don't like each other. There's something going on. That's so Perth.
We've got a lovely question from Anna saying, hello, Emily and Dave and everyone. What was the hardest part of the story for you to write emotionally? It's a big question, but this could open us up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Anna knows the answer to this too. It was definitely either section two or section four because the story's told in five parts.
Yeah.
And it sort of goes Winston's point of view, 1939, then George's point of view, his father. We go back in time to see what the secret is all about. And that was the last part of the story that I wrote as well. It used to just go straight from part one to part three. And all of George's reveal was sort of told in dialogue. But then I decided, no, I need to go a bit deeper here. Um, I think probably part four, which is the section set on the Thai-Burma Railway. That really opened up a lot of narrative possibilities because it was based on real history, and I really wanted to do justice to the stories of people who had been through that experience. When I originally started writing it, I was looking at the Sandakan death marches, which I
Mm.
believe there were only 6 people who survived that. So I sort of had to move away from that because I didn't want to kill Winston off. Sorry if that's a spoiler, but for those who love him, he does make it through. Um, and so I thought, well, statistically, it's just not, it doesn't feel right to add a seventh person and make it my fictional character, or to take away one of those real 6 people in order to have him be part of it. But that sort of led me to the Thai Burma Railway and the real history there. And I found some amazing biographies of people who had been through that, including some biographies in which people not only survived, but some of them escaped. Um, but reading those biographies, my goodness, like that's so hard to actually read about those experiences and to look at Jack Chalker's amazing artwork, which I drew on quite a lot. And then to have to write my own version of it and feel like I was doing justice to it. And I think I'm never going to feel completely satisfied that I've done I've done the best I could, but have I done the best anyone could? Probably not. It's such a complex thing.
Well, I'd have to say you'd have to have a heart of stone not to shed a tear
Yeah.
reading reading The Distance Between Dreams. You got me on several occasions. But I'm surprised that this section two, that was something that you added later.
Mm.
That
It
sheds
needed to be there. That's probably
yeah,
why it feels like it's natural.
yeah, it needed to be there. So maybe can I just focus on that for a second?
Mm.
So George's story in Northam,
Mm.
giving that context, why did you want to really dive into that rather than just have the dialogue? Dialogue could have worked, sure, but giving it a
Mm.
section and letting it breathe and letting it become a really intrinsic part, pretty close to the
Yeah.
heart of the story.
Well, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about Winston needing to learn that his father was a person, was a fully realized person, and not just the role that he played in Winston's life. And I think just letting him say what had happened and have them have a conversation, that doesn't really show the reader George as a full person. He's still Winston's dad. He's still who he is in relation to Winston, but giving him his own section with its own narrative arc. And even though it's in third person, it's quite a close third person. So we feel like we're literally inside George's head and seeing what he sees and thinking the things he thinks. That opens George up as a person for the reader as well, or I hope it does. And in particular, because he's got a really tricky decision to make. And I won't give away what the secret is between the two families. But the thing that happens, he's got a decision of, do I, tell the truth and get myself out of trouble, even if that's going to ruin someone else's life?
Mm.
And because he's a very moral person, he he makes a decision that has consequences not only for himself but for his son.
Mm. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Emily. And something I wanted to ask because this is something that the book made me feel is that I love your depictions of the physicality of male physicality and how
Mm,
important that can be when you're young. So there's Winston and Lockie with football and having
mm,
the occasional fight and then joining the army, but then realizing all of that is actually it doesn't count. That other
mm.
things in life, morals and political power and events that can overtake you in life and decisions that you have to make. It's a it's a hard lesson to learn. Uh, can I just maybe ask you to reflect on that? That like for Winston, allowing his other aspects of his character to come through, to lead
Mm.
other people and to hold his values together, particularly on the Thai Burma Railway. He could shine in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me sound smarter than I am, I think there. Um, it's
Come
that whole thing of like,
on.
when you go to write an essay about a book
Yeah,
and you say, oh, the author intended this, and they're bringing
definitely.
in this motif. And I'm sure if you asked some of them, they'd be like, I didn't do that on purpose. Um, I was very aware while I was writing this book that, I'm a female person writing a male
Mm,
character. And Winston was my first point of view character that I brought into it. And he does have a very sensitive side, and other characters talk about him being like a sensitive, new age, artsy type, sort of, in almost a detrimental way, because he's not a blokey bloke by any stretch of the imagination. But I mean, my partner, when he read it, he said, "Why does Winston blush so much?" And I said, "Well, do boys not blush? Like, is that not something that
Yeah.
everybody does?" And he said, "Well, no, I think the like physical reaction maybe boys do, but blush is just such a feminine word." And
Yeah.
so I tried really hard to get rid of as many instances of him blushing as possible, but it's kind of impossible. There's only so many times I can say the tips of his ears felt really hot before I'm like, I've said this so many times.
Right.
So then
He's
I
blushing.
just sort of, there's a bit in there about, Lockie makes fun of his tendency to blush
Yeah, there you go.
because,
Yeah, that's not, yeah.
that's another thing about him that's deemed not very manly.
No.
The football stuff also came in a bit later, and I became fascinated about how this was like, a big recreational pastime for a lot of people, and it would have been a thing that a lot of working class and other young men did, because they didn't sit around watching TV, they didn't have the internet. Maybe some of them sat around reading books, but what did they do in their leisure time? And football was a big deal. So reading about the history of football in Fremantle in particular was really interesting. My brother's really, really full bottle on football history, so he was my unofficial
No.
consultant, but any errors are definitely mine. But I wrote the scene where they go to the football, and my editor, Rachel, said,
Yeah.
"Okay, it really feels to me like you've just learned how football works and then you've like described it. So you need to like pare it back now." And I went, "Well, okay, yeah, that's kind of what happened, but I'll make it more natural if I can." But yeah, it was a big part of people's lives.
Emily, we have so many questions in the
Oh, do
chat.
we?
I know we have an hour, but we're rapidly running out of time. But can I please ask you to read us a section of the
Sure.
Between Dreams? Because I think it's right from the start, and I think this will
Mm.
open up for some of these questions to follow up. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. How long do you want me to read for?
How long is a piece of string?
All
You
right,
know?
cool. Well, I'll just read up to the bit where I've got my little
Yeah.
bookmark then. The sun was still up when Winston emerged from the house, but all of the sting had gone out of the day. He trudged back along the side of the house towards the road. If only Lockie had told him what time the party started. Why hadn't he bothered to check? After all these years of being friends, he knew that Lockie had a relaxed idea of punctuality. He leaned over to pick up one of the gum nuts that littered the ground and pegged it back along the path. It skittered uselessly along the ground. Winston sat on a low wall out the front of the neighbouring house and waited. He and Lockie had met during school when Winston was the tallest boy in his class and Lockie the smallest, the two outliers in a classroom full of boys who otherwise seemed normal. Winston was forever outgrowing the second-hand clothes his mother received from some of her tailoring customers, and Lockie, who had always been defensive about his size, was forever getting himself into fights. Between the ill-fitting trousers and the torn shirts, they looked like a pair of ragamuffins. Where the other boys had avoided Winston, who was quiet and often lost in some sort of daydream, Lockie had immediately found him fascinating. He had eagerly gotten himself into any number of his fights because someone had made fun of Winston, joking that he was the only one who was allowed to give his friend a hard time. Though he often made quips about Winston's tendency to blush or the fact that he was a sensitive, artsy type, the things Lockie said to him never really upset Winston because he knew that Lachlan Bell would always stand by him. Even when Lockie went through a growth spurt and suddenly began attracting the attention of girls and sporting teams, he never abandoned his friend. But lately, Winston had started to feel a little competitive towards his friend, like when he took Michelle Morris to the pictures before Winston had worked up the courage to ask her on a date. Sometimes he couldn't help but compare himself to Lockie, and he rarely liked the results. Winston didn't know how long he had been waiting, but after the sun went down, he started to wonder if it was worth hanging around any more. It may have been too late for him to start work, but it was still early enough to try to walk home and save the train fare. But then, what if he left and Mrs. Flanders decided she needed him? In the walkway down the side of the house, he heard two sets of footsteps crunching along the gravel. He jumped to his feet, smoothing down his hair and quickly sniffing his armpits to see if he'd sweated too much in the heat. He heard the hiss of a match being struck and then voices. I don't know what he was thinking bringing that friend of his here. Of course we can't take on another waiter the night of the party, particularly not someone with no experience. It was Mrs. Flanders. Her companion exhaled a mouthful of smoke before she spoke. Do you remember the New Year's party a few years ago when they hired those people who came to the front door looking for work? And then, while all the guests were sloshed, they made off with the silver? Mrs. Flanders groaned. Don't remind me. Lockie's friend seemed like a nice kid, but if I hired every nice kid who came asking, I'd have to ask the Joneses to renovate the kitchen to fit them all. Winston stood statue still, hoping they couldn't see him. He watched as they finished their smokes, stubbed them out, and traipsed back inside. Frustration built in his chest like a pot of boiling water. Damn it, he cried, turning and kicking the wall. When he turned back again, there was a young woman crossing the street towards him. She was pale and willowy and wearing a dress the colour of sunshine. Her bright red hair was pulled back from her face with a couple of glittery clips. Startled by his outburst, she stumbled and he put out his arms to steady her. Sorry, he called. No harm done. Her voice was a tone deeper than he'd expected. I didn't know anyone was there. I thought I was alone. That makes two of us, and no one told me it was a costume party. Pardon? Your outfit. What have you come as, a chimney sweep? I do like the suspenders, though. Winston adjusted the elastic at his shoulders almost without thinking. Sorry, no, these are just my clothes. Well, my dad's clothes, actually. The woman's cheeks turned such a deep shade of crimson that he could see it even in the semi-darkness. I'm so sorry, that must have sounded very rude. He shrugged, smiling at her, and was rewarded when she smiled back gratefully. I know my clothes are old-fashioned. Aren't you coming in? The party's that way, she said, inclining her head towards the big white house. I know, but She raised one eyebrow. Come in with me. I need someone's arm to lean on to stop these blasted shoes sinking into the lawn, anyway. Fix your collar and I'll loan you a comb. Sound good? Mouth dry, he nodded. Okay then, what's your name? I'm Sarah Willis. Winston Keller, he said. Sarah rifled through her pocketbook, producing a tortoiseshell comb. Here, sweep all your hair across your head towards one ear. Winston did as she suggested, unable to keep himself from grinning. Am I a completely different person now? She gave a hoot of laughter. Well, I didn't know who you were before. How should I know if you're different now? Sarah Willis held out her hand, and at that moment, he had a choice. Go home empty-handed or go inside with her. Okay, he said, let's go. I think you might be on mute still, Dave.
Yes, I am. Emily. Thank you for the reading. It's always great to hear authors, reading their work in their own words and in their own intonations. Well, I love your character voices. They're fantastic.
Oh, I do story time a lot at work.
Excellent. So Helen Pierce says, I love the book. I loved Sarah's female friendships were an interesting counterpoint to the romance. And then also, just to build on that, Randy Gravitz is saying, what's in the relationship for Sarah? Does she really love Winston as much as Winston loves her? Is he prepared to adjust her expectations to live at Winston's standard of living when she's been raised wealthy? So sort of switching the focus a bit to Sarah, can we?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. The thing about Sarah is she's grown up in a household where her parents are not really capable of loving her truly. So her mother has had a lot of really awful things happen to her and isn't really capable of loving anybody. And her father, he is so concerned with money and status and power that he only loves Sarah when she's doing something that makes him look good or doing the things that he wants her to do to sort of further some gain. So nobody really loves her for her. She has to be someone else in order to earn love from her father. And there's just nothing she can do for her mother to care about what she's doing because her mother's just no longer capable of that. So what's in it for Sarah is that there's this boy who just adores her for being herself. She's this prickly, almost like ridiculous caricature of a girl sometimes. She says the first thing that comes into her head. You see in that section that she immediately says, I didn't know it was a costume party, which is really rude when she realizes that those are just his clothes. And it's almost like a backhanded way. If she was a mean girl, she would sort of say, oh, nobody told me it was a costume party when she knew that it wasn't, but she genuinely sees his clothing and has this moment of like brain blip where she suddenly thinks, oh my goodness, am I supposed to be in a costume because this person's in a costume? Because she can't even conceive that there are people out there who are less privileged than her at that moment. You know, here she is at this fancy house. Everybody here is just as fancy because she's just starstruck. You know, her
Yeah.
friend Marley, she idolizes her because there's this slightly older, richer girl who lets her hang around with her. And Sarah thinks, you know, this is where it's at. These are my people. But actually, people who love her are her people, no matter where they come from, no matter what background. So the fact that Winston thinks that, you know, everything she does is wonderful, no matter if she's accidentally being rude or if she said something silly or if she's being ridiculous and pretending to be Jean Harlow and talking about spending her days drinking martinis on a yacht with a rich husband. You know, somebody finally loves her for her. She no longer has to try. And I think that there's probably an element of relief to that for her as well, to be able to turn off the performance mode that her father's kind of asked her to put on.
Was Sarah challenging to write, or was Winston challenging to write? In the sense
Oh
that,
my goodness, was
yeah,
Sarah challenging to write? Mm.
but it's
Yeah.
in Love and War, whether they're on the home front or whether they're off in the war, both characters face immense challenges. It's not like
Mm.
Winston goes off to war and Sarah has an easy time. There are,
No.
yeah. What were the challenges for both of them, I suppose, and then to bring them together to keep
Mm.
coming back.
I mean, Winston, his voice always came really easily. And I don't know what that says, but you know, aside from the fact that he is obviously uh, a male character and I'm writing from a female point of view, like that the physicality side of things we talked about before, that was probably the hardest part of writing Winston, but his personality and the essence of him was just easy. Yeah, he was always easy. No matter if I was writing him on the Toboma Railway or on the home front or at a football game or in the markets or wherever, because I knew him so well, as long as I knew the situation, I would know how he would react. Sarah, to some extent, she also was easy in that same way, except that people didn't like her. So
Mm.
every draft I wrote, somebody would come back to me and say, oh, but she's so like irritating, or she's too much, or she's so rude, or I don't see why someone as wonderful as him would love her. And you know, that is her central problem anyway. She thinks I am too much for everybody. Why would anyone love me? Um, so it was really hard to write someone who is feeling that way about themselves and also get the reader on side. And I mean, it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine that likable characters, you know, it always seems to be women characters that people are like, oh, but she's so unlikable, you know. And you think about that, there's so many examples of male characters in books where people love to hate them and they'll
Yeah.
still follow them for a whole book. But you
Oh,
get a woman in there
yeah.
who's kind of prickly, and people are like, "Nah, I couldn't stand her. She was awful. She was so mean to her family." Like, I think people are much harder on your female main characters. Um,
Yeah.
so every draft, people would say to me, I don't understand her. I can't sympathize with her." And I ended up keeping a whole diary. I've got a notebook somewhere in the background there that's a Sarah's diary, and every scene that's from Winston's point of view, I've written Sarah's diary entry for it to try and think, what was she thinking in this moment? How did she feel about the things that happened? But that still didn't help. It was only when I worked with Rachel Hanson from Fremantle Press, and she said, I can tell you exactly what it is. It's the way she talks about money.
Ah,
Yeah.
so that's okay, but
Mm.
that's also that's a weapon you can use.
Hmm.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
have that. Solid. Okay. Well, there's actually there's a question about editing. Let me see if I can dig it out because that's a really good one. That was from. Sorry, you have so many questions in this chat. It's fantastic. It's Oh, let's just follow it up. Sorry. So this is from Melanie Penny. I was curious about the contrary nature of Sarah in the beginning. On one hand, she's confident and fearless when bringing Winston to the party, and on the other
Mm.
hand, she's scared of her father and unwilling to follow her dreams. Is her journey throughout the novel a journey of self-discovery, a journey of a young woman maturing, or a look at the impact of World War II on young people's lives?
Mm. I mean, I think the answer is yes
Yeah.
to all three. Um,
Great.
Yeah, I mean, when we meet Sarah, she's really young. I think she's 16 or 17 when we first meet her. I actually can't remember because I'm now, most of the way through writing another book. Um, but she's really young. And by the time we get to the end of the book, she's in her early 20s and
Yeah.
she's, been through. I'm trying to think what words can I use to describe her without spoiling things, but she's been volunteering at the services canteen at the tramways building in Fremantle, and she's been in a Shakespeare play, and she's stood up to her bully, and she's had a really big fight with Marley, her best friend, because Marley believes that as long as everybody pairs up in nice little couples, like all the animals on Noah's Ark, everything's going to be okay. Um, so it is self-discovery because in the beginning her personality is really just like a collection of things that her father has told her she should be, and there's almost like this sense of her real personality trying to like force its way through, kind of like, I'm thinking of, when it's been snowing and then there's like a flower trying to grow out through the snow. So there's these little green shoots starting to poke through of things that are genuinely Sarah, and she becomes more authentic as time goes on. But you also get like when she's with different people, she's different Sarahs. The same way that I'm sure we all have different versions of ourselves that come out with different groups. Like when you hang out with people you went to school with, I'm sure you have a persona that comes out there versus the persona that you would have at your family Christmas with all your cousins and your grandparents. Yeah. So there's kind of that element to it. And so there's definitely like a Sarah that's in front of her dad and a Sarah that Winston gets to see. Um, the impact of World War II on young people's lives, that's a really interesting perspective because it was a time of great change. I mean, Fremantle was the biggest naval port in the Southern Hemisphere in the Second World War. The biggest in the world was Pearl Harbor, and that got bombed. And
Mm.
the Japanese were coming closer and closer and closer. So for some people, it was kind of like, oh, we're safe because the Americans are here. We've got these
Wow.
American submariners in our port, which was supposedly a secret, but I'm kind of like, how secret could it really have been when suddenly there was all this activity and all these people in uniform? And the young people were kind of being encouraged to show hospitality and go to dances, and they were, encouraged to adopt an American and take them home, and let them have a home cooked meal at your house. So there would have been this huge impact on the recreational life of young people who previously only would have known what Americans were like from watching movies, and suddenly they were meeting them, and all these dances were on, and but they were also, air raids and Anderson shelters, and yeah, it would have been a really strange time to be a young person. I guess much like what some of our young people have just been through with
Yeah.
COVID, where, the things that you look forward to doing when you get to that age suddenly have restrictions on them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great answer, Emily. Thank you. And there's a really great question here, which shifts it a little bit to romance. I want to talk about love
Oh.
and romance. It's from Randy. It says, I love the romance of this story. It's a testament to a bygone era that Sarah continually visits Winston's mum while he's away for about
Mm.
15 months, comes every Sunday. The the romance of this story is wonderful, but this is a very big question. Does love conquer all, or does it just provide very, great challenges to us? When you were
Yeah.
writing it, how did you tackle the subject of love and romance and human connection and
Oh no, I'm gonna like really disappoint a few
norms?
people here, but when I first started writing the book, I wanted it to be an anti-romance. I wanted them to basically go through all of this, find each other again, and then go, oh, actually, we're both really different people now, and there's no chemistry anymore, and then
Yeah.
just sort of part ways. And a few people who read early drafts of it were like, you just can't do that to people. Like, you can't make them invest 400 pages in will they, won't they, when the answer is they won't.
Yeah.
So I think I've sort of been true to that original impulse in how I have wrapped things up.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And it's interesting, the word romance, that was something I talked about with the marketing team from Fremantle Press when we did our like, marketing training session before we launched all of the events and everything. I sort of said, am I allowed to use the word romance? Because I know that the romance writers of Australia have very particular rules about what is and isn't a romance. And it has to do with, you know, particular tropes that get used, and they have to have a happily ever after, and sometimes things
All
about like, they
all
have
of
to
it.
kiss by this part of the book, and then there has to be some sort of escalation of the relationship by this point in the book. Like, it doesn't follow the structure of a romance by any stretch. But we decided we could use the word love story because love is such a complicated thing. I mean, there's the first flushes of love with the butterflies. And I think my friend the other day used the word limerence, which I thought it was a lovely word. He talked about the limerence of first love. And I'm kind of, thinking, damn, I wish I'd looked up what that meant, but I hope it means something meaningful here.
Yeah.
And then you've sort of got the maturing of love where it's, the shine is off the apple. It's that whole in sickness and health thing. It's the sickness part of it. For richer or poor, it's the poorer part of it, where you get to know the other person, warts and all, and work through the challenging things, and also recognizing that the other person comes with family and history. And so for Winston, that means realizing that being with Sarah means living with the shadow of her father and the things that he maybe psychologically has condemned her to live with forever, and maybe also her mother as well. And for Sarah, that means getting to be part of a loving family. And so that's part of why she and Elsie remain friends. And that's also a way for her to keep being with Winston by thinking about him and talking about him, because they are apart for a really long time. Their love story is quite a drawn out one, although it's not quite so long as Marley and Tony, who are engaged for like 6 years, which is really
Oh God,
unheard
yeah.
of at that time. But it used to be 8 years and we shortened the timeline. So
Oh wow, okay.
yeah.
And a follow-up to that, Jessica W is asking, love the complexity of this story. There were a number of strong characters, including Robert, but also Duncan and Charlie.
Mm,
How do you find balancing these types of personalities so they complement the story as opposed to detract from it? So maybe let's just
mm,
shift our focus a bit to to Robert and to Duncan and Charlie. I mean, this is more in the middle section of
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, can I just say I love how deeply everybody's engaged with the book. Like, you're thinking about things that
Libby.
when you think about the story mechanics stuff, if you know that you're doing this stuff intentionally, maybe the book won't take quite so long to write. But this book took like 17 years and 14 drafts. So maybe
Yeah.
it wouldn't have taken so many if I'd been aware that I was doing stuff like that. Um, these people, they're based on all the books that I've read and all of the amazing movies and TV shows that I've watched, but also on people that I've known. And it's, being a writer is partly about being an observer of human nature and watching the ways that people interact with each other. So for anybody that maybe hasn't finished the book yet, so Robert, being Sarah's father, he's a very damaged person because he watched his mother dying slowly and painfully of cancer, and believes that part of the reason she suffered so much was because his father was unsuccessful. And if his father had been more successful and had more money and maybe cared a bit more, he wouldn't have had to watch that happen to his mother. So when we, when we first meet him, he's fully grown, but the first time chronologically he appears in the story as a young man, he can't wait to leave home to go to university and be better than his father. And he hates George because George has come to the farm to work for the summer. And because he's not being an absolute dick to his dad, to Robert's dad, George is like the son that the family's never had. So, there's a bit of jealousy at play there as well. And that sort of continues through Robert's life. He's always trying to one up the people around him. He's always trying to like buy his way out of problems. Like, if he's rich enough and successful enough, bad stuff can't touch him, to the point where he becomes the bad stuff. Because he's just he's corrupted by the power that comes with being rich. Duncan is Winston's school bully who, um, it's not a huge part of the plot, but he doesn't like Winston, much for very similar reasons as to why Robert doesn't like George, because Duncan is from a well-off background, goes to a private school, has all of the privileges that being well-off can bring him, but that doesn't make him better than Winston at the things that he wants to be better at. So when Winston beats him at a sketching competition, and I think he wins like £2 or something and buys a bike, Um,
Spicy.
Duncan just cannot stand that. He's like, I've got a drawing tutor, and this nobody from the arse end of nowhere has just beaten me. And like, why can I not buy talent? And so, he gets back at Winston by bullying him whenever Lockie's not around, including like pissing on his drawings. Literally. And Charlie, I mean, it's funny when you said Charlie, I was like, who? Because I think of him as Sutcliffe. But Charlie Sutcliffe is Winston's best mate in the camp that he's in on the Thai-Burma Railway, who, um, he's the kind of guy that will flash his bum at the Japanese guards because he just doesn't give a shit. He's kind of like, what else are they going to do to me? They've already taken away my freedom. They're making me eat maggoty rice and burnt whatever this is in place of coffee, and they're probably going to shoot me and I'm probably going to die anyway. So like, what else are they going to do to me? So he's just basically waving the middle finger at life. He's constantly singing Gracie Fields, and the Japanese guards are like, please shut up, and he just won't. So if anybody's listened to the soundtrack that I made that's on Spotify, there's a Gracie Fields song on there, which is basically just the same couple of lines over and over again, and she has that very nasally voice. Just imagine a kind of cheeky, like larrikin farmer singing that with his bum hanging out, and it makes it that much funnier.
That's great, Emily. And I've got a question from Annie DeMoncho, writer
Hmm.
Annie DeMoncho, who's actually going to
Hi,
be
Annie.
a guest later this year on Libby Book Club for her wonderful book, Audrey's Gone AWOL. So Annie's asking, loving this, thank you both. I'd be interested to know if and how the editing process altered the story. We touched on that a little bit. And she says,
Yeah.
and in brackets, I'm greedy. What have you learned about writing from having written? Happy if
Mm.
you only give one answer.
So uh, I'll answer this in terms of being edited professionally because obviously I've like self-edited it many, many, many times. But I think, it's kind of like you get the book to the best level you possibly can on your own, and then someone who is just really smart and knows exactly what to look for to make a book better comes in and goes, what about these things? And points out stuff that you go, oh, wow, that was really obvious. But I was just so close to it that I couldn't see the forest for the trees, sort of thing. Um, I think a lot of what I learned was that like sometimes you've got to put a lot of stuff in so that you know it, and then you've got to take it out, and sometimes you've got to be putting stuff in while you're taking stuff out. And at one point Rachel said to me, we've got to get the word count down. It's needs to be 100,000 words, but I also need you to flesh out these plot points. And I'm going,
Oh,
I can't
oh.
do both. So I think it's about 107,000 words. And I sort of said, like, I will edit out anything that doesn't need to be there.
Sure.
I will tighten it to within an inch of its life. But I will not be just willy-nilly cutting out
No,
thousands
it's
of
actually
words to get to an arbitrary number. And she said, yeah, that's fair enough. Like if I feel like you've done the work and you've taken out, you trimmed all the fat, so to speak, then I'll be okay with that. And it's historical fiction. We love a chunky historical fiction book. Like, have you seen The Blind Assassin? That thing is massive.
it's huge. Sure. Wolf.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like, living for the day where I can have a 600-page historical fiction novel and people will actually buy it and read it. But I'm a debut author, and so I kind of needed to have a normal sized book to not intimidate people. Um, but yeah, like so much of editing is learning what you can cut and what you have to fight for. And, sometimes using like not a single word wasted and cutting out all of your adverbs and things like that is the answer. And then sometimes a really well placed adverb just makes
Just
the prose sing. So, it's about learning the rules so that you can break them. Yeah, that's what I've
I love.
learned. What was the other part of the question? I
The other
remember
part.
thinking I did want to answer it, but I can't remember what it was.
It was like, what did you learn from editing? Let me see if I can find it. What have you learned about writing from having
Yeah.
written? Yeah.
Yeah. What I've learned about writing is that I can't quit. I've tried to retire. I retired from writing because I wasn't getting anywhere with publishing, and I always come back to it. So that's what I've learned. I can't quit.
I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. That's how I feel sometimes.
Yeah.
Emily, you mentioned before this took 16, 17 years to
Hmm.
write. This has been something that, but you've also been writing, Well-Behaved Women, your collection of short
Yeah.
stories. You've also got another novel that you're about finished, which was also highly commended in the Fogarty. But tell
Mm.
us about the very long engagement that took
Mm.
place for The Distance Between Dreams. This is something that's been with you for a while. That
Yeah.
when you learn Japanese.
Oh yeah, I mean, I learned Japanese through school. I didn't learn Japanese just for the novel. That would have been
Specifically
quite a
yeah.
flex. I mean, I started learning Japanese in grade three, so I would have been eight. And did my what was called the TE in 2008 for Japanese, and didn't do a single Japanese lesson after that, but I can still remember some words, mostly for random things like the Japanese word for cockroach is gokiburi. But yeah, so 17 years was sort of from the inception of the idea through to the book coming out. So it was sort of like April 2008 to April 2025. And it wasn't continuously just writing the same project, but I did definitely work on The Distance Between Dreams, which was called The Compound for the first couple of years of its life, and then called Between the Sleepers for most of its life, pretty consistently. I was like, this is going to be my book. This is going to be the one. And I worked with a writers group and sent it to various different people for feedback. And a lot of them said, once I get up to maybe like page 50, 60, it just hums along. But uh, publishers are probably not going to get to that point. They're probably going to give up by then. And I looked at it and, turned it upside down, pulled it apart, and was kind of like, I can't fix it. This is just where the story starts. And I know that a lot of advice is kind of like you've got to start the story as late as you possibly can so that you start, what is it, in media res?
Yeah, which
Um,
is like
yeah,
then they
which
say, but can you just flesh out that front part a bit? And you're like, but I do.
yeah, it's like, oh, I don't know these
Yeah.
characters very well. It's like, well, yeah, of course not, because I've started in the middle of him having like the shit kicked out of him by a school bully. There's no time to get to know someone when they're lying on the ground clutching their guts. No, it's difficult. And so that was when I sort of went, well, you know, I've written short stories and I had the short story collection published, and that did pretty well considering it was with a really small local press. And I was kind of like, maybe I just had one book in me, maybe there's a difference between being someone who likes to write and being a writer who is published. And maybe being the first thing has got to be enough. I'll just do this because I enjoy it. And I vividly recall I was sitting on the balcony at our apartment when we were living in Subiaco. And, so this was right near the Subiaco Coles. So, like, just every 5 minutes, Coles trucks reversing in. So, it wasn't a very peaceful place to sit and read. But I was reading 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Harrow. And there was a scene with a party. And I was kind of like, okay, so in my book, we meet my characters, they meet each other, and then she convinces him to go to a party. But what the way that they were meeting was that their parents were all having dinner together. And, Robert and George hate each other, so it's kind of
Yeah.
contrived that George would invite Robert's family over for dinner. And what if they were actually already at the party? And how do I get Winston to be at the party? And somebody had said to me, Winston's kind of a loner. Why doesn't he have any friends? Okay, so what if Winston has a friend who's at the party? And there was already a bit where somebody sort of backed into a waiter and knocked him over, and it turned out to be someone Winston knew. So I was like, okay, what if that character is the reason Winston's at the party? And so just kind of taking something that was already there and picking it up, moving it to be the beginning of the story, and then doing all the other stuff and getting rid of the contrived dinner party scene. And so, like, I did already have all the pieces, but once I moved that building block, everything was just easy and it was working, and I could get people to that bit where it was already humming along. And yeah, so sometimes deciding that you're going to give up on a book and putting it away and being like, I'm going to go work on something else, that's when your brain's going to go, oh, hang on a minute. No, you don't. I know the answer. Trick yourself into thinking you've finished, because that's the way.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Emily. That's a really good insight, I think, into your process.
Mm.
There's happenstance.
Mm.
There's creativity. There's that. Yeah, that. What was the word you had before for love? It wasn't
Was it
liminal.
limerence or something? I'm probably using it completely wrong. Does anyone in the chat know what it means?
I like it
Please
though.
give me a definition so I can use it properly.
No, we've got almost 10 minutes left, so we're getting lots of great questions in the chat. I'll try to get to them as much as I can, people. So thank you. But I just wanted to ask as well, Fremantle is an enormous character
Yeah.
in this story. What's your connection to Fremantle? What do you love about Fremantle? Like, when did you first really
Mm.
the what got its hooks into you about Freo as a setting, as a place of historic?
Yeah. So when I got my editorial report back from Rachel at Fremantle Press, she said something about like I love the way Fremantle is a character in your book, the way that New York is a character in Sex and the City. It's kind of like, yes, they're
Nice.
sitting around in Fremantle talking about boys and yeah, no, it's but I see what she means because some books you could pick up the characters and the plot and move it somewhere else and the same stuff would happen, but it has to have been Fremantle for this specific set of things to have happened. Um, and what I love about Fremantle is that you go there and okay, at street level, it's kind of the same as any other suburb, maybe. Like if at street level you look at all the shops and stuff, and it could be Leederville and it could be Subiaco and it could be any of those streets that have like the retail strips. But you look up and the history of the place is very visible. It's for somebody who loves history as much as I do. Fremantle is a place that has a very proud sense of its own history. You know, they've preserved all of the facades of the buildings, and as much as possible at ground level, they've preserved as much of it as they can. And there are the plaques everywhere, and the walking routes that you can take, where you've got the little photos. And they've also incorporated their First Nations history into a lot of it. Not in a like a performative sense or in a sense of like this thing is over the top of this, but everything coexists together really quite naturally. And it's just it's a place that you go there and you feel like, okay, if I wanted to imagine that I'd gone back in time, I could very easily do that. And then that makes it really wonderful to research because you find all of these old photos and you can almost overlay them on your own memories
That's
and be like, this is this street, you know, I could walk down here. So I did a site-specific research trip with my mum, I think it was in 2014, where we went down to the Roundhouse and she was practicing photography and I was basically trying to get like the five senses engaged. So I was lying on the grass outside the Roundhouse and listening to the flagpole that's up there, the way that it blows in the wind. And, you know, what does it smell like down here? And what can I hear? Okay, let's not focus on the car noise. What else can I hear? You know, what does it feel like being up here? How windy is it? And it was just trying to get that real like embodiment of being in the place. Yeah, it was really cool.
that paid off because yeah, when Winston's up there
Mm.
sketching, yeah, you can.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all been in Fremantle when one of those really, really long grain trains goes through past the old whaling tunnel. And you just like stand there for ages waiting to cross because it's just slow
This
and it's
ever ends.
forever. And then like the sound of when it goes over the bumps. Yeah, it's a special place. I used to spend a lot of time there as a teenager.
Well, we've got everyone's jumped in the chat. Annie, Helen, Ivy Basley, Louise WH. It's all saying liminence is the mental state of being madly in love or intensely infatuated when the reciprocation of the feeling is uncertain. Limerence is
Ah.
defined as an involuntary, intense romantic obsession. An
So I
intense,
was using it kind of right, which is great.
yeah, yeah. And I love this one: the obsessing infatuation of another person and chemical reaction of feelings
Yeah.
and new.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it's that butterflies.
Butterflies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this segues perfectly. You're a librarian and you have
Yeah.
an enormous collection of books behind you.
This is only some of them.
Words and stories. These
Mm.
are deeply important to you. Can you tell us about, you know, what is the significance of writing to you, of reading,
Mm. Yeah.
of
Look,
literature?
I mean, maybe this is the bit where I'm going to get emotional because my connection to books and reading, I mean, my mum is a huge reader, but my mum's dad was a huge reader. He was an English teacher and he actually passed away last year in April. So almost a year before the book came out. So he knew that it was going to be published. He knew I was working on it. I actually had to ask for an extension on the deadline for my second structural edit because he passed away. And it was really emotional. It was kind of like, I don't know if I want to, you know, like the book is dedicated to him and my grandma. And they were my first beta readers. You know, I've got a marked up bound copy of one of the early drafts with grandma and grandpa's notes on it. And grandma has read it, and she has a copy of the book propped up on her little book cushion in her apartment, so that when people come over, even if it's just the cleaners, she can be like, my granddaughter wrote that book. Um, but it's very emotional to have been writing this book for so long and he didn't get to see it. So that was hard. But you know, I now work at the library that my grandfather used, well, the library service, not the actual branch, but they used to he used to take me to the library with my siblings, like every time he babysat pretty much. And you know, my mum was always reading, and it was obviously her escape that she would go to a room in our house that was like the formal lounge room where the kids weren't supposed to play, so she could go and read a book, and we would sneak in there and try and read a book too. And you know, going to the bookshop and being told you can all choose one book was a special treat. And I would agonize over which one I could have because I could only have one. You know, now I'm a grown up and I can spend my whole paycheck on books if I want to, and I frequently do. Even though I work at a library and I can bring them home for free. But you know, I feel like if you are a writer, particularly in Australia where we have such an oversupplied publishing market. Like there's so many more people in Australia who want to publish a book with an Australian publisher than who buy books by Australian writers. It's so important to buy books and read books by Australian writers, you know, like James Patterson is fine if you borrow his books from the library, but an Australian writer really appreciates it if you buy it. You know, we get 10% of the the cover price. So that's like less than you would pay for a coffee.
So bye if you.
It's hard to buy a few, like buy some gifts for people.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Emily, what are your literary who are your literary heroes, your inspirations? Not
Mm.
and not just for maybe just for the distance between dreams, but you know, who are the people that uh you know who light your fire, who kindle what you're doing?
Yeah. I did a post about this on Instagram not long before the book came out, of like my touchstone books. So I mentioned Amanda Curtin early on in the session. So Amanda Curtin's Elemental was almost like the first time someone had shown me a way to write about Fremantle and really make it feel like Fremantle. And you know, that was important to me. Tracy Farr's The Life and Loves of Lena Gaunt was a really important book. 9 Days by Tony Jordan. It would be remiss of me not to mention The Narrow Road to the Deep North. I was really scared that somebody was going to accuse me of plagiarizing because his book came out before mine, but I was writing about the Thai-Burma Railway a
Yeah.
long time before I read that book, I promise. But I think we read some of the same research material because there are some anecdotes that he's fictionalized that I read about in the memoirs that I was reading. And I guess, you know, that sort of kind of illustrates the fact that of all the people who survived that horrible ordeal, the people who were able to process it enough to write about it would have been very few, you know. So he wrote about his father's experience. Potentially his father knew some of these people who wrote these memoirs, or maybe he's read these same memoirs. But that book and the recent TV adaptation of it is just a really wonderful example of writing about a horrific experience. Margaret Atwood would be also one of my inspirations, and I'm on a real Jane Austen bender at the moment. I
Nice.
just watched the documentary series that was on ABC iView, Jane Austen, Rise of a Genius, and there
Yeah.
was a bit where she was talking about, well, she wasn't, but they did a dramatization of her life where they were talking about, you know, after 17 years, she was finally a published author. And I thought, oh my goodness, like, and it was like at the age of 35, and I'm 34, and I went, oh my goodness, like,
Yeah.
Jane Austen's journey and my journey have some sort of like parallel, and this is amazing. And I love her even more now.
You have to go on a research trip to Bath next. You have to
Yeah, and I
go.
have to write like a thinly veiled takedown of slavery and call it like, I don't know, Manning Park or something.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent. Emily, we are somehow out of time. That's
Oh,
absolutely
boo.
good. I just want to ask final question.
Mm.
What's coming up for you this year? There's a lot of people asking, you know, how can they follow you on social media? Where can they
Yeah.
see you? Have you got anything coming up?
So follow me on Instagram. I'm incredible rambling Ellamy there, so the L and the M around the wrong way. And from seeing this interview tonight, you'll know where the rambling comes from. Um, and that's probably the best way to stay up to date. I've also got a Substack, which is basically just where I like do a diary entry every month and burden you with what's in my brain. And I hopefully will have another book submitted to somewhere. I don't have a contract for it, but hopefully somebody will want to publish it. It's World War I this time. It's looking at the rise of Australian literature, and in particular, the rise of women writers of the early 20th century based on people like May Gibbs, Miles Franklin, Henry Handel Richardson, but also looking at the psychological trauma experienced by men who went through things like the Somme. So that's been really hard to write. And apparently, I like torturing myself by reading about horrific things happening to people. Go figure.
It produces wonderful art, Emily. Thank you so much for coming to the Libby Book Club and sharing all of your insights for The Distance Between Dreams. It's available right now on Libby with no holds. Right, and actually, funnily enough, I was saying before, Emily was the first person to actually tell me about Libby a few years ago. So I was like, okay, I'll get on that, and then here we are. So it was great to have a chat to you. I really enjoyed our chat tonight, Emily. Thank you so much, and thank you for telling a wonderful story. It was brilliantly done, and you got me many times in the reading of this. And thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. Thank you for all your questions. And I wanted to say as well, I think Randy Gravitz. I'd like to send you the copy. So this is my email address, Randy. Sorry to you can all see me
Yeah,
type.
I would agree with that. Randy had that really great question where we brought up the word limerence, I think. So, yeah.
So Randy, get in touch, send me get in touch, and then I'll put you in touch with the Libby people, and they can send you the copy. That would be wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your Wednesday evening, and enjoy reading in this time. See you later.